I'm Lin-Manuel Miranda, and you're listening to Hard Knock Life.
Well, it's the NOC in full color, you see me? The Hard Knock Life, comics, movies, and TV, yeah.
Welcome to Hard Knock Life. I'm Keith Cher.
I'm Brittany Monet.
Hi, I'm Dominic Ma.
Today on the show, we're going to have a special interview with Mark Bernardin, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime...
Great. I like that guy.
Yeah, he's awesome. He can't talk about the Black Panther game, unfortunately.
That's okay, but he's working on it. It's an important thing.
Yeah, and he's got 1,000 other irons in the fire that we talk about. Irons in the fire I want to talk about, particularly, are the first 3 episodes of Andor.
Yes.
Because holy shit, I think it's my favorite Star Wars ever.
It's so good.
It's good stuff.
So let's talk about it. I mean, as soon as you saw it, Dominic, you were like messaging everyone. You really, really liked Andor. And I was just curious, what is it about the show so far that you've taken to?
Well, because to me, the writing voice and concept really shines through. And again, here the caveat is it seems good if you like those Bourne movies. If you like the Bourne Identity movies / Tony Gilroy's aesthetic, then you'll really like this, because this is basically if you use the template of the Bourne Identity movies to make a Star Wars series. So if you don't like the Bourne movies, you're still not going to like this one. However, it's great. You know, he has a certain style. It's very like jargony. It's very like, you know, the half the iceberg under the surface of the water. I can't remember what the phrase of that is, but people talk around things and then they get to their point, and it's some sort of, you know, there's a lot of espionage and double talk involved. And, you know, it's uncharacteristic for Star Wars. You know, we don't have that many big dialogue scenes in Star Wars like this.
Well, and I think this is the first Star Wars of all of the things we've seen so far, from the Skywalker saga to all of the Disney Plus series that we've had, that has such an identity, I think, right? Because the one identity that it's lacking so far, and I think in a good way, is the recognizable Jedi Force mumbo jumbo, right? And this gets into the nitty gritty of what it means to live under the Empire on a planet. You know, Brittany, what is it about Andor that, and you've been anticipating this series since Jump Street, so now that we have it, what have you appreciated so far?
One, I like that you can tell that it's more practical sets than the volume, or if they are still using the volume, Tony Gilroy makes it seem seamless, which is nice. But like, you know, Rogue One was one of my favorite things that Disney did, so to follow Andor again is really cool. And I think, like Dom said, the dialogue in it is very different than what we've seen from other Star Wars stuff. And it feels real. And like you also said, we actually get to see what's like living under the Empire, being a regular person, pretty much. You know, because we see how the whole entire town reacts to, what were they called? The
Corpos.
Yeah.
Corpos, yeah.
Corpos. Like we
saw all corpos are bastards.
Like we saw how, you know, all of that, like it was all really, I feel like everything was done very well so far. I feel like hopefully it keeps up with this momentum. You know, Stellan Skarsgård is always fun to see. So I don't know. I'm on board.
And I feel like it's answering some of the questions that we asked out loud before. Like Keith, at one point you were talking about would be good to get into, you know, how the Empire really builds and how the rebellion really builds, you know, on an earthy, on the ground level that we can understand. Because like one of the valid sort of criticisms of Star Wars as a fantasy thing is it's always been sort of cut and dried of good versus evil. It's like you just sort of one day you decide, oh, I'm definitely going to be good, or oh, I'm definitely going to be evil, you know, and that works for the mythic aspect of it. But here they get into this, like, who are these people? I know. Did you feel like
absolutely
addressing that?
One of the most fascinating things, honestly, so far, and I haven't seen, I know a bunch of screeners went to episode 4. I've only seen like everyone else, the first 3 episodes. So I don't know what happens in the next one. But I will say what I really appreciate about the first 3 is that, yes, the characters feel like real people. That like when you first meet Cassian in Rogue One, what does he do? He murks a guy.
Yeah.
And what's the first thing he does?
Uncharacteristic for Star Wars. Let's say.
Right. Well, that was what was cool about Han Solo until George was like, actually, he didn't kill Greedo in cold blood, right?
But he was a pirate. Anyway, sorry. We'll not rehash that right now.
It's kind of tragic when he does it in Rogue One because it's like his colleague, but he's like, I can't trust you to like not reveal the information because you're hurt. So I'm putting you out of your misery. And that's the first time you meet the guy and like, holy shit, he's a ruthless bastard. And then in here, it's accidental, but he still kills a guy.
Yeah.
The very first scene that you meet him, essentially. So it's kind of like, I thought that was really cool, like how they bookend your intros to Cassian Andor. But what I was going to say too is that, like, talking about the moral kind of ambiguity, I think the character of Cyril, played by Kyle Bowler, I think is his name, the main Imperial corporal bad guy.
What I really, who is not Kyle MacLachlan, but definitely seems like he's Kyle MacLachlan.
Right.
Okay.
Wait, but the one who looks like Simon from Misfits.
I don't catch
whatever that means. I don't know what that means.
No, he was on Game of Thrones. He played the one bastard.
The one that tortures everybody.
Yes.
What's his name? The dogs guy. The guy who.
Right. So if that guy and Kyle MacLachlan had a kid,
sure,
it's this guy Cyril or whatever his name.
You know, like he's a hard to like guy. He's one of those like uptight bastards. But at the same time, like the scene where Stellan Skarsgård and Andor get away, like he seems traumatized. He's like he's a cop who's never seen battle.
Right.
And then the way they follow the cops, you know, like you see them as these like, again, they're like real people because they're like, you have the ones who are just doing their job, and then the ones who like who think he's like a badass and he's really not. Like I'm thinking of the chubby guy. He's actually the commissioner from the Batman. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I didn't realize that either, but I thought he looked familiar. I was trying to place where I'd seen him until
he's Commissioner Savage from the Batman. But he's got the great line though where he's like, there's fomenting. They're all out there fomenting. And he's like, you know, he's like trying to rile them up, but he's also like, it's like those cops again that were like the bullies in high school, and then they get a badge and then they think they're like tough shit, you know. I really that you don't get to see that in Star Wars. You know?
I want to talk about those corpos for a second because I think it's a very clever thing they're doing, and I hope it goes through. I think it's going, which is, you know, it's sort of an analogy for like the private mercenary forces that governments have that are even more dangerous than the army if we're talking real. Like
I mean, like, I don't know. I feel like they're more glorified mall cops than mercenaries.
Okay, yeah, no, they have all those elements going on, but I think the thing is like the showrunners very correctly figured out that stormtroopers are no longer threatening. We've just made so much fun of them over the years that when they show up, they don't present like actual threat. They're just like, oh, there's going to be a laser battle with stormtroopers. You know, I think there's an exception. There are exceptions, but I'm saying it's cool to introduce the enemy mercenary force as something else. Really, you know, they actually call them corporate tactical forces, which
they're the corporate cops. Like that's
very real things in the world. Blackwater, Baldwin Felt's detective agency, all that shit. And they're like, you know, these outlying functionary people who are sort of on the track to eventually become in the core empire and, you know, up the chain.
Well, it kind of shows like how the empire operates, right? Because they do outsource some of the policing, especially on these kind of like working class planets, to the corporate cops, right? Like the empire themselves can't be bothered to send a garrison down there, so they kind of like have this security force that they employ. Which again, I mean, that's the other thing that I really, really like so far about Andor is that you really get to see, you know, and as much as I love The Last Jedi, I feel like these 3 episodes really do show the class distinction that Rose was so passionate about in Last Jedi.
Right.
You see it here, right? You see like the working class planet, the guys who were, you know, scrap iron, whatever. The Andor's mom is a scavenger, you know what I mean? Even the guy who rings the bell. You know, I love that scene. It's so
I loved it too, with him walking up all the steps and then he does
this kind of ritualistic thing, but like it's his job.
Yeah.
That's his one job, is to ring the bell, and he does it with this kind of like ritual, and the way it's shot. This is a very well done Star Wars.
It's great. And also, like, I know I referenced this book before, but it's also a romance book, but it's a Star Wars book. It's Lost Stars by Claudia Gray, which is about these 2 younger kids from a more poor planet in the system, and how basically the empire is, and how they kind of believe the bullshit that is being spread by the empire, and why, you know, certain people are more likely to sign up because they don't realize what they're signing up for is actually, you know, the bad guys. And it's a really good book, and they ended up on like 2 opposite sides of like basically the war, and it's a really fun book to read. I would highly recommend if someone wants a little bit more of like that type of idea of, normal people being forced into this situation.
I mean, because we get to see like so clearly in these flashbacks to Canary, and like that was another thing I wanted to just harp on. Just something I loved about these first 3 episodes was like it does this audacious thing of contrasting. Yes, we've got the very dialogue-y spy shit scenes, and then it like juxtaposes with these scenes which are told totally without dialogue, or rather without dialogue that we can understand. And they're told in a old school like silent film kind of way. Just watch these people and watch their actions, and it's like it's fairly bold as far as like a filmmaking style thing to go from super talky to not talky at all. Watch the images, but it totally works, and it speaks to all sorts of things like where Cassian's mindset is, and why he speaks with an accent, and evokes to all sorts of where great revolutionary leaders came from. I thought that seems like right on.
And the way, like, structurally, I understand now why they released the first 3 together, because structurally that B plot of the flashback with the young Cassian, the way it parallels in the 3rd episode is so brilliantly done, because they constantly cut back and forth to Cassian going off with Fiona Shaw's character Marva, with him going off with Stellan Skarsgård. Like it mirrors his like leaving his home to kind of join this greater adventure. And like, because I've seen some complaints that it's very slow in the beginning, and it's a slow burn before you get to the good stuff. And it's like you need that like storytelling for that 3rd episode to hit the way it does.
Yeah. Now let's be real. This wouldn't have sold if they just showed to be the first 2 episodes. They needed to debut the first 3 episodes at once, because it is a slow burn. And also, just really quickly to say, but it's also like this series is a little bit of an outlier because it's going to be 2 seasons of 12 episodes each, as we've already it's already set that there's an arc that lasts long. I read this interview with Tony Gilroy, and that's the only reason I know that. But yes, it is some version of a much longer story arc than we're used to in these streaming series. And the streaming series things, it's still a small sample size. We've only had a few of them. So this is a more adventurous one in the sense that they've got a more planned story to tell.
And I think what's interesting, like, again, comparing this to another Star Wars property, it's got a very fixed point to get to, because unlike Obi-Wan, like, the thing about Obi-Wan is that if you had one critique about Obi-Wan is that he goes through this arc on the series, but then the arc is a circle, because when you meet him at the beginning of A New Hope, he's the hermit who lives in a cave kind of overseeing Luke. And that's where he was at the beginning of Obi-Wan. He goes on this great adventure to get back to being the old hermit who lives in a cave watching Luke. So like what's cool about Andor is that he's got to get to Rogue One where he dies on Scarif. Like that's it. You don't have to worry about like giving him a 360-degree arc. You can make him be this naive kid to become this just like smuggler who's trying to scratch out a living, to becoming this revolutionary who gives up his life to get the Death Star plans. Tony Gilroy has also said we're doing 2 seasons and that's it. We have a complete story to tell.
I hope they figure out a way you can meet the Guardian of the Wills again, but probably not. That would take a little bit of convoluting.
Yeah, especially because he meets them for the first time in Rogue One. It would be weird.
Right, but I mean, they did that thing with Obi-Wan and Leia where they sort of fudged the issue in that last series. I was hoping they would do something similar, but probably not. This is because I want to see Chirrut again.
But I hope they go a whole story without referencing the Jedi. Like,
they could.
What's so great about this show is that And again, if you think about the mythology of the Jedi by the time of A New Hope, people have forgotten about them. They're not like in the front of everyone's minds that so much so that you see a guy in a brown robe in A New Hope, you don't even think he's a Jedi.
Right.
At that point, they're fairy tales.
Yeah. And so I kind of like, even with you can write off Chirrut Imwe as kind of like a crazy like religious guy who just believes in this hokey dokey religion.
Yeah.
So, but you don't want them being a huge part where he's like using the Force and shit, because then it's like
right. And really that aspect reinforces this whole thing we've always been told, that like, oh, we forgot about the Jedi, but we don't believe that from watching all the prequel, what we've seen so far, because like they always have like the Jedis and there's always lightsabers and shit. So it's like, you're the last one hiding, right? You're the last one hiding, it's I'm just trying to support your point that it would be good to see the world where people have actually forgotten about the Jedi.
Yeah. What really sets this stuff in motion is a very human frailty, right? The guy was jealous that his girlfriend was hanging out with his other guys so much, so he calls the cops. Like that's the catalyzing factor to this whole process, is that Tim, who's got a great Star Wars name, Tim.
I know. I was like, what kind of name?
And he sees his girl, is like, why does she keep hanging out with this Andor fella?
Can we just talk about Bix for a second? I really like Bix.
He's great.
I hope she has a much bigger story to tell, because I hope it's not just because he's leaving the planet and I'm like, oh, is that it? Is that what we get of Bix? But she's dope.
Yeah, I mean, and the actor who plays Bix is Puerto Rican background. I gather. So again, Star Wars is getting really Latin American, which is cool.
Yeah,
it's different. Again, like that first scene where they meet and like talk around the subject for a while and get all emotional about it before he finally says, this is the thing I have, I'm trying to sell. And like it's so well done and so Gilroy-ish. But as like I also will say, for very superficial reason, I like her because she does fit the phenotype of the Star Wars female actor who is always there, who's always like a petite woman with brown hair and complicated hairstyles and sort of elfin beauty, and is usually British or Jewish in all the Star Wars movies. Okay, they have a type, and that's a very superficial thing I just wanted to point out. It's great, except for that she's the Latin American version of that, and it's great.
Right. Yeah, I hope that she definitely has a larger scene. What's cool is that like the thing I was most excited for about Andor was seeing Mon Mothma and the whole like political intrigue, and we haven't even gotten there yet, and I'm already like 100% bought in with Stellan Skarsgård character. I love that he's like carrying the stunt version of the lightsaber. Like there's it looks like the lightsabers that they use when they're practicing behind the scenes, that this like staff that he has. But to your point about like the double talk and the dialogue, like their meeting was a clip they actually released before the show came out, but
I didn't watch it.
Yeah, well, I watched it and I was still like riveted. And when the scene, I was thinking I'll just fast forward through, but I was already riveted by their interaction, because now having all of the context of the previous two episodes made that that much more compelling. Real quick before we wrap on Andor, how are we feeling about Marva? You guys recognize Fiona Shaw from
that's Aunt Petunia.
And Aunt Petunia from Harry Potter.
Oh yeah, Aunt Petunia.
Yeah, I was like, oh, it's Aunt Petunia, even though they kept calling her, even when after they said what her name was, I'm like, it's Aunt Petunia.
Oh, let me ask you, Brittany.
Yes.
Where does B2 Emo rank among the droids? Especially because, I mean,
the name,
fellow emo queen.
The name is everything. I think I had tweeted B2 Emo is the kind of emo that listens to Taking Back Sunday. So
I mean, the name itself, right? You get B2 Emo, like he's being too emo. Like, come on.
Yeah.
And he's like always worried, and he's always like
in a show full of subtlety, that is a gag that was not subtle, and it was great.
I love him. I kind of want a little, like, I don't know, something of him. I liked it a lot. It was funny, and I was just laughing. I was like, that is not his name. At first I thought I misread it, because I always have subtitles on when I watch stuff, and I was like, that's not his name. And then when they showed it again, I'm like, okay, that is his name.
I wish like they all call him B, and I kind of was like wish they would just call him Emo.
Me too.
Maybe they will. You should totally make the playlist of what he's listening to in his little box there, because he seems a little depressed. I
feel like Brittany, that can be your triumphant return to the Nerds of Color's written blog. You should just come up with the B2 Emo playlist, because I think of all of the Nerds of Color, you have the the prerequisites to write out the
I feel like I have a couple already that I'm like, yeah, this is what he listened to. But definitely Taking Back Sunday seems like that would be his band.
With that post will go viral. I have a strong feeling.
Of Marva, I'd like to say Fiona Shaw is great. It's good for her to occupy this sort of elder leader role that Kenobi fills, and all the myths there as a elder source of authority that we can look to. And also, like Batman and Superman, who are orphan survivors of their destroyed childhoods, Andor has a mom named Marva or Marva. It's just so there's another parallel for you.
I didn't even catch that.
It was not intentional. I totally laid that forcibly on there.
Why did you say that name?
why did you say that? But yeah, no, that's not important at all. But I want to rant about the very first scene and the very first episode of Andor for 1 second, because it is really a great way of undercutting and yet expanding on, our Star Wars vocabulary, what we expect. As you said, like the first big dialogue scene is between him and Bix in a garage. Big dialogue that would not cut it as the first big scene of a real Star Wars movie. Someone said like that can't be the very first scene. And so the first scene where he's, entering this club, sort of a sex club, sort of a Mass Effect vibe. And like,
I mean, this is the first Star Wars that fucks, like literally.
Yeah. It does that. And so then the first action scene, like, I think it's so well done. Like, it's just focused on him, center punched, just he's hearing the voices of the threat, approaching him. There are no starships, there are no lasers or anything. This is just a very strong POV of this guy who likes to live in the shadows and the threat approaching him. And you're just on him in the center. And then it opens up a little bit and we see when the threat actually gets close to him. And it's just like so well done in on the ground, subtle, like in the streets kind of way, as opposed to a big space battle happening through the stars kind of way. And I don't know. So I just want to shout out to the directing and writing and acting of that part, because it just sets the scene wonderfully, I think.
But like the fight itself was not like well choreographed, martial arts, right? Like he throat punches a guy, he tackles another guy. You know what I mean? Like it was like raw and gritty.
Yeah, it was like a little guy getting accosted by bullies for his lunch money. Like it was that kind of fight. And we all understand that little dude. Yeah, what are they called? The pre-war coach. By the way, that's another Tony Gilroy staple, is like the corporations with like weird obtuse names, like Pre-Lore Morlanta or whatever that thing is called. That shit is so boring. But anyway, boring. I didn't mean to make it sound like so boring. So
it's not boring.
It is so boring.
Very boring.
Anyway, that's what I want to rant about. I really like that shit. Really like
Andor,
that.
I think is definitely a high mark, and we'll see where it goes. Like there's a lot more Andor to go for this season, and we're just scratching the surface. Real quick, give a few minutes to the other Disney Plus show that came out this week, She-Hulk. Here's the thing. Even if you point out and make the joke about how disappointed everyone is in this particular episode, it doesn't make it less disappointing. You know what I'm saying? Because they were very aware that like everyone's expecting Daredevil, and then Jen looks at the camera and was like, "Oh, yeah, this is a self-contained wedding episode. We're sorry," basically. And it's like, just because you can point it out doesn't mean that we don't have to be disappointed.
It might be that TV trope called lampshading or something. Like when you have a flaw, you just sort of shout it out so people won't notice that it's a flaw.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I wasn't feeling this week's She-Hulk. Brittany, where are you?
There are parts of it that I liked. I liked more of the stuff actually back at the office with
Renee Elise Goldsberry.
Yes. I was like,
I don't know the character's name.
I was like, what's her
Angelica.
real name? Yeah, I was gonna say Angelica, and I was like, that's not right. I like the stuff with her and oh my god, I can't forget.
Nikki, I think her friend.
Nikki, yes.
Yeah.
Like I loved all the stuff more with those two than I did with the stuff following, She-Hulk. Which again, I'm like, I don't know. The CGI still is bad, and I hate to keep harping on that, but it is bad. And then I don't know, but also her friend who's getting married is a really terrible person. I hope she's not going to be friends with that person anymore past this episode. But I don't know if
it's a little funny that she's so bitchy.
I just don't know if I trust that guy though. That was all like talking to her at the wedding.
Yeah.
But he was cute though.
Oh, we don't? Okay, because we like here's where the Asian radar thing gets in. Like I think he's Filipino, maybe, but maybe not. I looked him up. It's unclear, but often when it's just a little interesting, coded shout out to the Asian Americans watching. There are a lot of these little Asian American Easter eggs in She-Hulk.
Patty Harrison's Asian American too, who plays the bride to be.
Oh right, there you go. You cannot tell book by its cover all the time. Anyway, when there's a hot guy, it's usually a Filipino guy. That's can we agree that's a half Filipino?
But so real quick, Brittany, what makes you suspicious of him? Just because
I think he works for whoever's trying to get that blood sample of her.
He's in the wrecking crew.
Could be
just because of like they showed the lab and then they showed them having that like sample thing or whatever.
Right,
and I
right,
was
with the
like,
bigger needle.
so that's why I was like, I wonder if he works for them, because they showed him and then they cut to that. So that's why I went to that. I don't know, but I really, you know what? I think Jamila, I think she's really the best part of the show. She's hilarious. I love her voice.
One thing that I did think was interesting that they introduced in this, they're kind of expanding on the whole internet trolls from a couple episodes ago. There's actually like a 4chan version of the in the MCU where
Yes,
they're targeting She-Hulk, and you know, I just find it interesting that both She-Hulk and the Batman from earlier this year both had at the ultimate villain like Reddit and 4chan. Because remember, the Riddler was like, they should have changed his name to the Redditor and not the Riddler, because that's what he was in the Batman.
They should have. Yeah, it's a weird one. I mean, it's very true. It's a little yeah.
I mean, we agree it's the leader, right? Like that's the guy behind the Wrecking Crew, and
that's
what I think it is.
I thought he wasn't showing up till Thunderbolts.
Well, I think they're seeding him now, and he'll come back for Captain America. That's what I think. I could be,
because I heard she's gonna be now in that movie.
In Captain America?
Yeah, they just said something that she's rumored to be in it. I don't know how true that is, but you know.
I just wanted to say about this She-Hulk episode, like, I hope they are getting the people who like romantic comedies, because they are not getting me. So that's what I mean. Like, I feel that's what this is geared for. So that's why I thought it was interesting when you said, Brittany, that you like dug the B story with the two other lawyers. Because like, I like that story, but also I still feel like it's sort of taking away from like, can we focus on something? But maybe that's not the point. I don't know.
But even the A story didn't focus on Jen either. Like, that's the thing.
That's the problem. It kind of like she was being pushed to the background, and she's like the side character that, like, you know, I mean, I guess, yes, in a way, I don't know. I don't know. I just feel like, why would you go to this wedding if this is someone who's obviously, I feel like she knew this person was going to treat her like that way. So that's kind of why I was just like, Jen, really?
Yeah. And it's all a bit formulaic and tropes, you know, like this is the problem of the week at the law office, and this is the one where she goes to wedding. We get that. So I hope that's working for some people. But I do want to say it's just like a little bit of a cheat when you combine that with the meta talking to the camera thing, because you're literally saying, this is the part where we switch to the B story. And that's kind of funny, but actually, you know, just again, comparing to Andor, where you're really in the world with the people, it takes you straight out and goes like, oh, this is page 12 of the script. And the writer wanted to get to page 13. Yeah. And that's funny a couple times. I'll just say that, but it's a little bit of a cheat.
Yeah. And it's not even like they could have, I feel like if they did something else a little different, even if Daredevil wasn't in this episode, I don't know, there was something missing from this episode for me. And it's not necessarily Daredevil, even though I was hoping he was going to be on this week. But
I think everyone did, especially with the tag last week, was like, you know, oh, next week. And again, that's why I think the very first thing Jen says is like, to the effect of like, if you were expecting something else, we're actually going to do the self-contained episode, basically.
And that's low-key mocking the fan base. And to, you know, as we are mockable, because we shouldn't be waiting for Daredevil to make a cameo.
Right.
I mean, for the whole reason to get to the show.
Yeah.
Yes, we should be focused on her, but I just feel like the CGI, again, just what really takes it out, especially in the wedding, you could really just see it, because I feel like so much of that set was more, not as much of like the volume or something.
Well, and it's the lighting too. Like, the lighting, Jen doesn't look great in natural light.
It's just, yeah, I don't know. It sucks. I feel bad to like constantly harp on this and make it seem like I'm only going after the female fronted show, but no, there's just
that's not true. You liked Ms. Marvel.
I really did. Even though I said it straight from the comics, I really did dig Ms. Marvel for the most part. This, I feel like there's some weeks I'm like, yeah, this episode was really great, and still my favorite episode is the one with Madison and Wong. So.
Agreed. Well, let's take a break. After the break, you'll hear my interview with Mark Bernardin, and then after that, we'll come back and share what's nerd pop. Hard Knock Life is being sponsored by Athletic Greens. I want to talk to you about Athletic Greens. With one delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. Basically all the things. One of the best things about Athletic Greens is that it's lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free. It also contains less than 1 gram of sugar and no GMOs, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything, and it still tastes good. Athletic Greens uses the best of the best products based on the latest science with constant product iterations and third-party testing. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's just 1 scoop in a cup of water every day, that's it. No need for a million different pills or supplements to look out for your health. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is partnering with Hard Knock Media to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/emerging. That's athleticgreens.com/emerging to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. I am very excited to be joined by my friend. He is a raconteur, jack of all trades. You know him as a co-podcaster with Kevin Smith on Fat Man Beyond. His writing credits also include Star Trek Picard, Castle Rock, and Master of the Universe Revelation. He's also the Eisner nominated writer of Adore in the Distance. Please welcome back to the Nerds of Color and Hard Knock Life, Mark Bernardin.
Hey, Keith. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. I'm not nearly as busy as you are because just over I feel like over the last couple days and weeks, it's just like project after project being announced. You have Census on Comixology. You have the Black Panther Captain America game where you were at D23. And of course, just recently announced the Muhammad Ali graphic.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ,
Well,
Mark.
I mean, it sounds like a lot of things, but they've also been like deep in process and progress for years, sometimes decades. And so it's that weird thing where Zach Stentz is a buddy of mine. And one summer he had out both Thor and X-Men First Class within like a month of each other. He's like, yeah, but we wrote those movies like years ago.
I mean, the Ali project has been in development for, I feel like you said on Twitter, like your first email about it was like a decade ago or something.
It was a decade ago, yeah. Like I was still working for the Hollywood Reporter at the time, and I got a call from my literary agent who was like, "Hey, so First Second wants to talk to you about a thing," and I was like, "I don't know what this could be, but all right, sure." And I'm like, "Well, we're looking for somebody." She's like, "Do you like sports?" Depends on the sport. And it was like, "Yeah, we're looking for a journalist, somebody who knows how to do research, knows how to do kind of like fact finding and." Keeping the appropriate notes and that sort of thing, and a graphic novelist, and somebody of color because we have this Ali project we want to do. And I was like, I guess that's me because I think I do check all of those boxes. And then 10 years after that first conversation, we get to announce a book that's still not coming out for a year.
Right.
But the book's done, it's written, it's drawn. Like I've seen covers. All of it's like now it's like in big boy book production world, which seems to take much longer than comics.
Right. Yeah. First Second, even though they do graphic novels, I think Gene Yang says this all the time. It's like because he's First Second poster boy, But like doing a First Second book is very, very different if you're used to the grind of comic books, and then vice versa, because he went from the First Second world to pumping out Superman comics and was like, whoa, you need this stuff every week.
Hold on. Like I'm used to months, not weeks. Years, not months.
Oh, and I'm glad you mentioned, you used to be with the Hollywood Reporter. We met when you were at Entertainment Weekly. And of course, you've moved on from journalism to doing everything else. But how has that journalism background helped you as a TV writer, as a comic writer, as a podcaster, as a sometime actor in Kevin Smith movies? Like, how has that background in journalism helped?
I mean, journalism teaches you two things, chiefly. One is speed. Especially if you're working for a weekly or a daily or an hourly, website to newspaper to weekly magazine. So you got to work fast. You got to write fast. Like the time can't be spent to continue to like dither. And I got to make sure that it's a perfect turn of phrase. And they're like, no, man, we got to get it done. Like something's got to be on these pages. And so it teaches you sort of the discipline of speed. And also it teaches you how to emotionally disconnect. Because, as any writer will tell you, whatever they're working on, it is their entire world while they're working on it. And it's like, I gotta like, this is it. Like, it's the thing I've wanted to say. It's everything to me. And I just want to hold it and cradle it like a baby and like pat it and burp it. But it's like, no, it's got to go. Like you have to let go of it. It's going to go up to your editor. It's going to go onto the page and then it's going to go onto the world. And so, when you're writing something as in depth as a TV episode or a feature film or whatever it is, it's your whole world for the time you're working on it. But then you just have to let it go. And then the things that will happen to it once it leaves the house are not your responsibility and it's nothing you can control. And keeping both of those things in mind has been a godsend of just both from a work-life balance sort of way and just emotional health of like, you have to let it go. You can't, it's not your baby anymore.
Yeah.
You know, as I drop a kid off at college.
Well, congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you.
That's a first for you, right? The first kid to go to college.
That's the first. And like, you know, just learning that lesson of like, he used to be like 10 feet away and I sort of knew where he was every night and could, you know, talk to him every day, or when he got to high school every other day. But now it's, you know, I get weekly updates. What's going on? And like,
yeah,
right,
and that's just gonna just drop in frequency as they get older, right? Like,
totally. Like as he goes and, you know, builds a life and moves to a city and gets a job, and it's like, well, maybe I'll hear from him, you know, on Sundays. Maybe I'll hear from him every couple of Sundays.
right. Well, you do get to tickle the journalist itch every once in a while, since you do also co-host a podcast where news is a big part of the Fat Man Beyond podcast, and it's kind of grown beyond. I remember it started out as a Batman podcast, and you were just like an occasional guest. How did you become, like, when Kevin's off doing tour spots for Clerks 3, it's your show. It becomes Black Man Beyond and it becomes your show. Like, how did you get roped into the podcasting world? Because I don't know that was always a goal, the way maybe making a movie by the time you turned 50 was.
No, I had zero ambitions of podcasting whatsoever.
And now you're reading Manscaped ads every other week.
Let's talk about your balls, boys and girls. It was the most delightful, felicitous accident where, you know, I remember interviewing Kev once or twice for Entertainment Weekly, and then we got to be friendly. And then, you know, I'd come out to LA from New York, where I was still living at the time. It's like, hey man, you should stop by the house. You know, I just finished a movie. You want to come see it? It's like, sure, I'll come see it. It's like, hey man, I do a podcast with my wife. Do you want to be a guest in the morning? And so I rolled over to his house at 8 a.m. to do an episode of Plus One with Jen and Kev. And then he's like, oh, that was fun. Like, I did this Batman podcast. Do you like Batman? I'm like, yeah, I like Batman. It's like, all right, well, think of your top 10 Batman stories and you come on and be a guest. And then that just became sort of a conversation. I think that the Dark Knight Returns had just dropped, and he's like, oh, we should talk about that. It's like, oh man, let's do a commentary track for that. That was fun. Mm-hmm. And like, I've still never talked to him about my top 10 Batman stories. It's still like on some notebook somewhere. But then it was like, yeah, let's just do these commentary tracks. And we made it through all of the Batman movies up until Batman Begins. And then it was like, hey, that's cool. Let's just do Gotham. And then Gotham was not a thing that either of us loved enough to talk about every week for, you know, 200 episodes. And then he's like, oh, how about we just do the podcast together, you know, and we'll do this little news segment in the middle of it. Like, what's happening in pop culture today? And then that just sort of became the podcast. And then at some point it's like, hey man, do you want to be the co-host of this? I was like, what do I have to do? What do you need from me?
Do I need an outline every fucking show, or do I need?
Yeah, like, am I booking research? Guests? Am I like, no, man, just
drive out the Scum and Villainy on a Tuesday night or whatever.
We'll just do it like this until one of us gets bored of it. And so far that hasn't happened, thankfully, because it is fun and it's just a joy. And he's a lovely guy to be around. That's a good spirit to have in your life and to be able to absorb the energy of. But, you know, I guess it was when he did Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, it was the first time he took a movie on tour. It was like, yeah, man, I'm going to be gone for like 4 months. And it's like, well, I suppose like there's still going to be news while you're gone for 4 months. I suppose like I could just keep the feed alive. That's all it was to do. Like the Black Man Beyond stuff was just like, it's shitty when you're a fan of a podcast that just goes dark for months on end. I was like, I'll just put something in there. And then it just became like, all right, I guess I'll just call some friends and see if they're around and if they want to hop on the podcast with me. And we'll do some of them. I mean, at the first time we did them all live because, you know, that was how the podcast was done. So let's go to Scum and Villainy. Let's hang out. Let's record a couple podcasts. And then, you know, pandemic hit. And then it became like, well, all right, I can do this on Zoom and we can do this on Zoom. And that's totally cool. And so now we're on the second Kev's on tour and I've got a podcast.
Yeah.
which is weird and random. And to your point, not a thing that I was courting in any way.
Well, and I think some people forget, like, Kevin was podcasting before podcasting was a thing, right? Like the podcasting network existed, I feel like 15 years ago, right? Like it
Yeah.
was him and Mark Maron were the only people.
It was like
putting out
him and
this
Mark
thing called
Maron and
podcasts.
like Adam Carolla, I think,
Yeah.
had a podcast or something.
Right.
And kind of nobody else. And so yeah, he's like first in the door in the game, and it's been like 15 years that he's been doing it. And I think we've been doing Fat Man for maybe
wow.
10 years.
Has
9
it
or
been 10 years?
It feels like it, I think.
Or are
You
you just
know-
saying spending time with Kevin feels like a long time?
I mean, it's the weed time dilation effect.
The space-time continuum does extend when you're around that much pot. Well, you know, I was I think going back to like, you know, you did the Battlestar Galactica podcast. Did that predate your experience with Fat Man? Or
No,
was Fat
no,
Man the inspiration for?
Batman was
venturing
my
out?
way in, and it was like, and the only reason that podcast even happened was because I had a little bit of podcast experience. Like when I first talked to Trisha Helfer about doing it, she's like, I don't know anything about doing a podcast. It's like all I know is Battlestar. And I says, well, I do this other podcast, and so I know a little bit. I don't know a lot. I don't know how to edit. I don't know how to produce. I don't know how to.
But I can talk.
Yeah, like I don't know how to feed it out into the world, but I can help build a structure of what that podcast looks like, and I can at least connect us with people who do podcasts. And she's like, well, that's better than I got, so let's go and make a podcast.
Well, and that became a genre, you know, unto itself, where the cast looks back at. I know there was like the West Wing Weekly, and now you have like the It's Always Sunny podcast. It's like that's become its own genre of
It totally. And like we did rip it off wholesale from West Wing Weekly. and to the point where I reached out to Rishikesh Hirway, and I was like, hey man, do you have some tips, some advice for doing the like what do you need? Did you need legal approval from Warner Brothers to do clips of the show? Like he was just the
Yeah.
font of information. And I always credit them. It's like, yeah, it's 100% a person who was on the show and a person who loved the show.
right.
And that's the dynamic, and that's what makes it work. And then every episode we'll talk about an episode of the show itself. But then maybe we will, and it'll just wildly digress. And it was great, and it was wonderful. And yes, now it is its own genre. It is its own like, you know, TV recap thing that we never get any credit for being at the front
Yeah.
of that vanguard.
Now that the podcasting thing is out of the way, you have all of these graphic novel projects you're working on. I wanted you to spend a little bit talking about Andor, though. I know that, I mean, you're on this Rinky Dink podcast. You were on fucking Seth Meyers talking about it, so thank you for slumming it with me. But it's such a great book. And was this your first Eisner nomination?
It was. Yeah.
What was that
I mean,
experience like?
It was a little bizarre in that I've been an Eisner judge before.
Mhm.
You know, I've attended the Eisners. I've read any number of Eisner nominated books, but being nominated for a thing is always a weird feeling of like, I guess they liked it kind of, and I guess that's cool. And I am going to harbor no misconceptions that we have a chance in winning. And Kev is always like the most rosy. It's like, oh man, you're totally going to win. You're going to win. What are you even, why are you being a chump about it? You're 100% going to win this. I'm like, I never believe that we are. I never believe that anything is
Kev's such a fan. He went out and burned a bunch of anti-Pope graphic novels after the ceremony because he was so mad. Shout out to
It's like,
Shane
what?
Floor.
Yeah, for sure. I was like, I don't know what our competition is, but I have to believe that somebody else is going to win this, which is exactly what happened. But, you know, to the point where I had no speech planned, because I just didn't, like, I always believe that I believe that the bad news is what's going to happen, so that I allow myself to be surprised by the good news, as opposed to hoping for the good news and being disappointed when it doesn't happen. Like that is just,
Always going with low expectations, I think.
go in with like, yeah, absolutely. Be surprised. Find a way to be surprised. But the experience was kind of lovely, you know, in that people read the work and they liked the work. And that is all at the end of the day you want as a person who writes stuff and makes stuff is, did it find that audience, and did that audience appreciate it? And, you know, for every nomination for an award is great, but it is, I would happily trade the experiences of listening to kids and adults and parents come up to me and say that I love this book. Like this book gave me a window into somebody that I love's life that I didn't have before. And this book touched me and all that. And like, that is worth pounds more than a nomination or even a win for that.
Right.
matter.
Or even the trophy itself.
Yeah.
And now you're working with your longtime collaborator, Adam Freeman, on yet another comic. This is a Comixology
hmm
exclusive. That means there is no hard copy floppy of this book? Maybe eventually a trade. Is that how that works?
That's the
Tell me how
plan.
the digital comics space works.
At least with Comixology, it is digital first and then print to follow. So we'll be monthly, I think it's like the 11th or 12th of every month, a new issue of Census will drop, 5 issues total. And then when we're done with that, I'm pretty sure it's like next spring, there's going to be a trade collection of the book. And it's a thing that Adam and I had sort of come up with and been playing with for years. Just this idea, both of us grew up in New York. Both of us had our first like big boy jobs in Manhattan. And just that feeling of stumbling through some street in New York past a bunch of doors, some of which looked like restaurants or whatever, some of which were kind of foreboding, but just there's more doors than people and what's behind all of these doors. And if it was somebody's job to just knock on those doors and ask the very simple census questions, who lives here, what's their place of origin, and then just move on. But to have each one of those interactions have the capacity for adventure or humor or horror or fright or action or whatever, felt like, oh no, this is we could do this forever. Like, this could be 100-issue long book. Like all we need, that's a lot of work, but still, it just felt like an idea that we could generate lots of content off of. And it's been fun. It's been fun, and it's fun to get to be a little funny. I don't often write humor because I end up, the science fiction action guy, or in the case of Adora, like it's full on a quest narrative that doesn't really ask for much humor in it. But to write, like, not to say it's a sitcom, but there's jokes. There's jokes and senses, both visual jokes and just like textual jokes. And it's been a riot. And the Comixology folks are super easy to work with. They're like, we like the idea, go make a comic book. So great. Here's the artist we want to hire. Will he work for the rate? Yes. Excellent. Let's move on.
I mean, you've done, traditional comics work in the past. We were joking earlier about like the difference between the book market and the comics market. But how has does doing comics for digital, is it a different process? Because I feel like Census was just announced and it was like, oh, and it's out like tomorrow, right? Like we're usually like there's a longer lead time because you have to go to printing and then it's got to go through Diamond and all that nonsense. But like with digital, I've kind of like secretly said this even when I worked at Diamond, like people were just like would rather read the books on their phone than go to the comic shop every week. And then if they really like the books, get a trade later, kind of like what became the Comixology model. But like, do you see, like, is it as a creator having like less barriers to like get it to the reader? You kind of just do the digital file and boom, it's there.
Yeah, I mean, there's something, the weird part about making print comics, especially print floppies, is that you're asking two different audiences to buy the book. You're asking the stores to order the book months before the book comes out. So you're doing a whole press wave and a whole PR push just to get retailers on board.
Yeah.
And then you're doing a second one to get readers to show up to the retailers to then buy the book the way it is. And there's some things you can change, some things you can't. But with the Comixology model is, yeah, we can announce the book on a Friday and it can drop on a Tuesday, and we're only having to sell it once. And we're selling it to the consumer. And there's something kind of streamlined about that and awesome about that. And being able to work up that level of enthusiasm from an audience once is more sustainable than having to do it over time. And yeah, the process has been really smooth. Like, I love print comics. I love working in comics. Comics is like where I go to play. So I don't think that it's ever going to be a thing that I kick to the curb in favor of, TV or movies or video games for that matter. But it's relatively low impact in terms of, yeah, you get to write a thing and an artist will draw a thing, and then we can just press a button and an audience can read a thing. And that's kind of cool.
Well, I wanted to ask you about being a video game writer, and I know that I probably can't ask specific questions because I think Disney snipers are right there peeking down through the window. But I will ask maybe a more process question, again, going about, how to be a writer. You've done TV, you've done comic books, you've done film and short film. I do want to talk about Splinter. How is writing video games? Because I feel like, straight up, I'm not a gamer. Like, I'm just I have no, like, I can't figure it out. I can't figure games out. I get frustrated and then I just stop playing. Right. I don't understand how people spend like 20 hours solving puzzles and shit. So I'll just say that, and I've lost all of our listeners and viewers. But the other thing I know about games, having played my share, is that there are all of these options that can go very different directions. And so like just coming from a creative perspective, like as a writer, is it like choose your own adventure? Are you having to write like 12 different narratives in order to tell the one story you want to tell? And if there are any secrets about the game you want to reveal, please.
Right.
No one's listening to this podcast.
Nobody's. I mean, the thing about there are so many different kinds of games. The kind of game that this is, at the present, Untitled, Black Panther, Captain America, World War II adventure game, it is very much like Uncharted, which is the game that Amy Hennig, who is the creative director of this game, is best known for. And those games, and it's a narrative game, it's a first-person game, it's a single-player game, they offer the illusion of choice, but not choice itself, because there's a story that needs to be told. And so it's on rails. Like, it is going to tell the story, and it's going to carry you along with it as it goes. Now, you can fail at a particular point in the game and not get further into the story, but it's not an open world game. It's not Skyrim. It's not Grand Theft Auto. It's not,
which is a different skill of game writing, I guess.
Totally, which is, here's a bunch of things in the world that you could do. If you stumble upon them, great. If you don't, they're there, and we don't care. So the process of writing this particular game was very much like Uncharted, which is, there's a story we're going to tell. That story will take us anywhere between 8 to 10 hours to tell. And so we'll probably slice it into chunks, and we'll treat it a bit as if it's of a TV show. Except, the thing that I learned was games have a failure state in a way that watching a thing doesn't, in that there has to be an opportunity for you to succeed or fail. Otherwise, why are you gaming at all? The most rudimentary version of it is like, it's a puzzle you got to solve. And if you don't solve, you can't keep playing.
Right.
And so just figuring out how to leave room for the game mechanics to take over, to make it a vicarious experience, to make it I'm actually punching Nazis in the face as Black Panther, because you want to do that because that just sounds fun.
It sells itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Andor, Steve Rogers, great. Let me just throw a shield into a bunch of Nazi faces. That's also great. But it's figuring out how to tell a story that is captivating and transporting and involving, not just for you playing, but for the person who can't play games or doesn't want to play games as a spectator. Because like, I know that my mom, who loved the Black Panther movie, but saw none of the rest of the MCU because she just didn't give a shit, she would love there to be a World War II set in Paris Black Panther game with Captain America in it and Gabriel Jones and Nanali, and like, let's just tell this big ass story. She's never going to pick up a controller to do it. Right. But if I could deliver her a Black Panther story that she might be involved in, she could stand over my shoulder and watch. That was the whole point of at least my involvement in the game, was to make it so that, and a bunch of other people, a bunch of other writers with us, like, how can we make this as transporting and involving as a great episode of TV that you can also play? I've
been guilty of going to YouTube and watching like all of the cinematics of Star Wars Battlefront into like, a 2-hour movie. So I totally feel what your mom is saying, because
totally.
Again, as a non-gamer, it's like, but I want to know what happens in this, so let me just watch this 2-hour YouTube video.
Right, like, this seems cool. Never gonna play it, but I'd like to know about it.
Because I'm stupid, I can't figure out the puzzles. So I alluded earlier, the other thing that you've been working on, and I think you're still deep into, is this short film project that you kickstarted successfully last year. You had this goal to make a movie by the time you turned 50, and I think you were just under the wire. At least you started production.
We missed it by a week.
Close.
My birthday was November 29th. We started shooting on December 5th. And it was literally one of those, like, should we damn the torpedoes just to try to make a date? Or could we actually use this week?
I don't know. That it works for Warner Brothers, I guess.
Yeah, just go. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
We'll just cancel it later. Anyway.
Nobody's going to miss it.
But yeah, so tell us about Splinter. Like, what was the idea behind it? When can people, expect us to see the finished product?
The idea, it came from a conversation, as many things in my life do, with Kevin, in that he had been approached to do an episode of the Jordan Peele produced Twilight Zone. And he's like, do you want to do a Twilight Zone? I said, yeah, I want to do a Twilight Zone. It's Twilight Zone. It's great. And they had an idea that they thought would be good for Kev, but they also said, but if there's anything else you want to do, pitch it and we'll think about it. And so we started talking about it. And then on the flight home, we were both in Vancouver at the time. On the flight home, I started thinking about the things that are always in episodes of The Twilight Zone. And the two of which seems to kind of mate together nicely are there's always an episode on a plane, and there's always an episode with a kid who's got freaky powers. You know, apparently the two things that Rod Serling was most afraid of was flying and children. And so then I just had this idea to kind of put the both of those together that had a little bit of a twist at the end of it, but had, it was very Nightmare at 20,000 feet of like, here's a thing that you think is mundane and normal and terrestrial that then becomes supernatural as it goes and then explodes into like action and a little bit of horror before you get the question that it asks at the end of it. And this was specifically wrestling with ideas of faith and is belief necessary for, prosperity, for safety, for salvation. And so I wrote up this thing, sent it to Kev. He loved it. Sent it to Twilight Zone. They dug it. But like, we already have a plane episode this month, this season, maybe season 3. That never happened.
Which never came, right?
Which never came. And so I was just sitting on this idea that I liked. And I'm like, oh, well, the Twilight Zone was always meant to be, done in one. And what if we do this? And like a moron, I aimed way bigger than your average short film, which means like now I need planes. I need a plane that I can shoot on, and I need a child actor, neither of which I had in my hip pocket. And one of them made it an incredibly expensive short. And so, the minute I brought on a producer who starts like breaking down the script and doing research as to where we can shoot, it's like, oh yeah, you're going to need to crowdfund this. You're going to need to raise money for this, because I was willing to spend X, and this is going to cost lots of Y's. And so you're going to need some help. And so like we raised the money, like I said, last December, we shot it. We've been in post ever since. And it's been a mixture of paying people who are experts for their time and their effort and their talent, and counting on favors from friends who can deliver, amazing work for far less than they should be getting. And so like literally my email box now are the closing credits that I just need to approve, and then we're done. Our deadline at this point is September 26th, because that is the last time we could submit to Sundance.
Oh, okay.
And so that's always been the festival circuit was always the final resting place for this. And so that's our deadline, and knock on wood, I think we're going to beat it. And then that's where we are. And as soon as it starts submitting to festivals, as soon as we're done, means I can start sending it to the Kickstarter backers. I can start sending out links so people can watch it, because, that's what, at this rate, some 2,400 people drop money in the bucket for.
That must have been an amazing experience, like just feeling to have like, those folks show up. It's kind of like what you're saying when you have to sell the comic to not only the retailer, but you just go straight to consumer. It's kind of the same thing here.
It's very much the same thing. It was so surreal, because I was 100% convinced that it wouldn't happen, and as always, apparently a recurring theme in my stories is, and so Kevin told me, Kevin said, you got to believe, man. Like,
actually, that's something I wanted to ask you about. One, before I get to that question, I did want to ask if, now that you've, all this work to go into this short, did you get the bug to maybe now I want to do a feature? Or is it like, oh, I did my movie, I'm done, this is too much?
It's people have been asking me that the entire way through the process. And while making the short, I was like, I don't know if I want to do this again. This is a lot. And then, but like the minute we wrapped the short, I was like, I think I have an idea for another short.
It's like when you have the baby and you like the mother forgets of all the pain that went through.
Yeah. Like nobody would have more than one kid if you couldn't forget the pain of the first one. And so yeah, like I think there's probably a feature version of Splinter. And so once it's done, we'll see if there's any traction there. Once we make it, start dipping our toes into the festival scene, and once other people get to see it and we can actually talk about it for real. Maybe, I don't know, like
you're too deep in it right now.
A little too deep into it. But there is something incredibly fun and rewarding about getting a bunch of friends together and playing pretend.
So that leads me to the fact that your podcasting partner in crime, Kevin Smith, is probably the most famous DIY filmmaker, right? Like Clerks was made on like a shoestring at night when he was, off the clock. And that was of course 30 years ago. And I wonder, like, just comparing that experience of like what it's like now to be able to like if Kevin Smith was in his 20s today and wanted to make Clerks, do you think it would have been easier? In what ways would it have been harder now that you've gone through the experience of like making a movie in the 2020s?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin always says like, man, we had 23 grand for Clerks and you had 4 times that and you're making a short. Like I made a whole ass movie for a fourth of the money. You know, I think it's funny because I think at the time when Kev made Clerks, you know, if you were an aspiring filmmaker, you had to make a film, right? Like that was the sole mode of expression you had. Like not many people were making shorts because there wasn't even that much of a festival circuit at the time. Like it was just beginning. Sundance was just kind of brandy new at that point. But like it wasn't as if there was a YouTube or a TikTok or an Instagram to be an outlet for your thoughts and your ideas or whatever. Would a Kevin Smith today make a movie? Maybe not. Like maybe he'd just have a fucking kick-ass TikTok channel or a kick-ass Instagram feed or a kick-ass YouTube space.
Which is actually like so many of the, you know, like the Shang-Chi action coordinators were like the Marshall Club, like, and they did everything everywhere all at once. Like they came straight from YouTube to these like mega franchise films. So you're right. YouTube is kind of like where folks go when they want to make films nowadays. Yeah,
because everybody's got a movie studio in their pocket, you know, and so everybody, like if you've got some talented friends who can do a thing with their bodies and their faces and their minds, and you've now got a capture medium and a distribution venue, then like what's to stop you? You know, unlike in 1991, like you needed to get together film and a camera and a crew, and we needed to shoot it, and then we had to hope somebody would buy it in order for anybody to see it. But now all of those barriers don't exist anymore. And so I have to think that the person who wants to be, quote unquote, a voice of a generation doesn't necessarily need movies to be that person.
And do you think, so the flip of that question is like, what would be harder now is that because everyone has the studio in their pocket, you have exponentially more competition. Whereas like in the 90s, it was like Kevin, it was Richard Linklater, it was Quentin, right? There was like 6 of them.
Yeah, Rodriguez and
right, exactly. But now it's like there's literally 80 million people who have the ability to do that.
Yeah, I mean it's easier than it's ever been, and when it gets easier, the pressure on the people who want to do it is harder, because suddenly now you have to have the thing to say that will cut through, or you will have to have the point of view or the weird innovation and technique to be able to slice through that nobody else is doing. I mean, it's the Robert Rodriguez of it, right? Like, only thing I can afford is to edit, and so I'm going to make these movies with so many cuts that it feels like it's bigger than it is. Like that's my jam. That's my thing that I'm doing that nobody else is doing.
Right.
And you know, I've barely scratched the surface of TikTok because it frightens me.
Yeah, it's the same, bro. Like that might as well be a foreign language.
As did Snapchat before it. But you know, just looking at when you see like the best versions of TikTok and just some of this filmmaking, some of these transitions, some of these, just all we have here is a camera and all we're doing is inventing a new language of cinema. Like, it's amazing to watch. You know, it's sometimes headache inducing, and that's fine because it should be, as I'm an old man.
Yeah.
It should not be for me. But
I think the greatest sin TikTok will unleash on future film goers is just how it fucks up the aspect ratio, where everything is now vertical.
Yeah. I know. It's like, why is this movie funny? Like, well, I shot it landscape, not portrait, like a movie.
Yeah, exactly. Well, before we wrap, Mark, anything else you want to announce? Since, you know, like I said, project after project. I know, like, you were on Fat Man recently. You were being cagey about a project you and Kevin were working on.
Yeah, it's a thing that we you know, I had been working on for about 6 months, and then, you know, brought it to him at Comic-Con. Like, we literally, after one of our podcasts at Comic-Con, I was like, I kind of think I want to talk to you about. And I pitched it to him. He's like, yeah, let's go do that. Which, yes, absolutely can't talk about it yet. And it's still like early
no
days.
One's listening, Mark. It's fine.
It's nothing to see here. Moving on. But yeah, I mean, the process, the mire of Hollywood is such that you've got to have like 6 or 7 or 8 different things kind of always happening at once. Some of which are way more active than others. Some of which are like, oh no, this is the thing I'm working on today and for the next month. But there's always like a plate that's in the back kind of spinning, just in case, you know, just in case like it decides it wants to move up, just in case the trends of the world seem to favor it, just in case there's a person who you think can be amazing as a collaborator, who has some availability. Like, so that back in the 5 years ago, like Census was one of those plates. You know, the Ali thing was one of those plates. The video game, you know, was maybe barely on the horizon, but I had met Todd Stashwick, who was my way into the video game. Like, and then there's the things that fell apart that nobody will ever get to see.
Right.
Because that's also like the hit rate is always low. It's like baseball, right? Like you could be a slugger and hit 1 out of every 3 pitches.
Right. That's 30% is good in baseball.
30% is great.
It's kind of what's
So-
kind of crazy. Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. And so, you know, if you're gonna be like, sure, there's the Vince Gilligans who are like 3 for 3, but then there's everybody else like, all I want to do, man, is get on base.
Yeah.
Like if I can get on base with some semblance of regularity, then I'm great. I'm golden.
Yeah. You know, you're not only a creator, but you're a fan too, right? And like the line between fan and creator has blurred tremendously over the last 10 or 15 years. And, you know, like when you were doing Masters season 1, parts 1 and 2, well, actually season 1, part 1, because that's when all the like people lost their shit, right?
Yeah.
And fans were very vocal about it. I mean, Kevin was visibly upset, I think, by a lot of like the fan reaction. But you see this, it's not just Masters of the Universe fans, right? Like the Snyder Cut, like everything that fans feel entitled to, they have a voice now because of the internet. Like what we were saying, the internet, YouTube makes you more vocal than before. Like, just what is your take on, you know, fandom and like that line between fandom and creator, allowing fans maybe more say than they should? I don't know, maybe it's a good thing. Where do you fall on that debate?
I mean, I think I fall in I've been a fan of things that I've both loved and been disappointed in, but I understand that fandom is a passive experience, you know, in that I come to it as a receptor and not an influencer in what's happening. And I've also heard from lots of people who make things that listening to fan reaction is ultimately like, you want to hear what people think, you want to hear how they respond to stuff, but they can't quite be part of the process. And the reason is because so many of the things that we love in the content that we absorb and intake, we would not be privy to making. Like nobody who loved Game of Thrones would have requested a red wedding. They just wouldn't have. They wouldn't have requested the death of Ned Stark. They wouldn't have requested, you know, all of those moments that surprise us and shock us and twist us and delight us, because we don't know what we want yet. We only know what we like. And sometimes we don't know what we need. And there's no way to be party to that as a fan. You can't know what you need as a fan. You're just going to ask for what you want. You can be tickled and pleased by stuff. Like, I never in a million years thought that what happened in Endgame is what was going to happen in Endgame. And yet it meant the world to me when it happened, and it all kind of clicked, because even though I'm a fan, I don't have the same perspective as Marcus and McFeely and the Russo brothers and Kevin Feige. And they sort of know for themselves holistically what the story needs to make it the best version of itself. And a fan can't know that. And a fan shouldn't know that, because then they're not a fan. Then they don't get to sit there on opening night and lose their fucking minds.
Yeah.
Because they know too much, and they shouldn't. And so I still believe that even as a fan of stuff, that there's stuff that I love that I have no desire to make. There's stuff that I make that, you know, that I still love dearly, that I get to be a part of, having any sense of what it's going to be in the world. But the entitlement of here's what I want, go make it, isn't the way it works.
Everyone's become Kathy Bates in Misery almost, right?
Right. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, sure. Would I love George R. R. Martin to finish that book? Yeah. Does he owe me that book?
Right.
No. You know, do I have any claim on his time and his pace in which he wants to write that book? No. I'm a fan of it. I'll happily take it when I get it. I may never get it. And that just gets to be another story we get to tell as fans. But we don't own it at all. You know, as much as I wish George Lucas would have stopped monkeying with Star Wars, it's like, I get it. I mean, it's his. Like, his name is on it. If there's a thing anybody learns in elementary school, is if you put your name on a thing, it's yours. And so his name is on it. He can do whatever he wants to with it. I am then reserved the right not to like it.
Right.
But I, you know, the idea that fans should be listened to in terms of dictating future story feels like not just misguided, but not actually what fans want.
Right.
Because what we want is to be surprised by a thing that we love.
And then it's hard to say, like, what do the fans want? Because no one fan represents all the fans. So for every fan, your Rise of Skywalker, I think, is a perfect example. For every fan you're trying to satiate, there are like 1,000 others that you're pissed off, and vice versa, right? So.
Yeah, and fans will come to things when they come to them. Like I was not a fan of the Star Wars prequels. There's a generation for whom that's their Star Wars.
Right.
And they love it. And, for a while I was shitty about that because I think they're awful. But who am I to say what makes a person happy?
Yeah.
Who am I to say what dictates how they define themselves by, the media they intake? And so if you love those movies, love them to death. If they're what Star Wars is to you, power to you, man. If you can find a way to love something in this godforsaken world, why do I have to be shitty about it?
Yeah, and I wonder if that's just something, because to your point, I think all of us, particularly those of us who are of a certain age, matured in our fandom and went from like shitting on things to accepting things, to be like, love what you love, man. Because I think that's where I am. I don't have to, if I don't like it, I don't like it. If you love it, you love it. And I think that's the lesson.
Yeah, and also I think that we're in similar enough age brackets to remember when we were just grateful to get it.
Yeah.
Because it was 3 years between Star Wars stories until it was 15 years between Star Wars stories. And then we got one? Oh my God, this is amazing. And now we live in a world where we're getting everything we want every week.
Yeah, it's almost overwhelming.
It's over. I don't have enough time to watch all the things that are made for me.
Yeah. Totally.
And so it's easy to be somewhat more blasé and dictatorial about it. I was like, well, you couldn't have made that better. You couldn't have been wise. I was like, I just remember being thankful that we got a crappy movie out of anything, let alone, the height of television and cinema is being made of stuff that we loved as kids.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave it there. Mark, thank you so much, as always, for joining us here at the Nerds Club. You are a true friend of the pod. For folks who may not be familiar with your work, how can they find you on the internet?
I'm relatively easy to find. I am at Mark Bernardin. That's Mark with a C, Bernardin with 2 R's, on both Twitter and Instagram.
But not where you think. Just kidding. Sorry.
Just all at the end. I don't truck with Facebook that much anymore because it is a hell space of diminishing returns. But yeah, man, I mean, Census now out once a month, every month until I think it's September, so probably January, if I can count right. And then hopefully I'll have some more information about other stuff sooner rather than later.
Good luck on Splinter. Good luck on the podcast. Good luck on all the things that you're doing. And again, thank you for stopping by this Rinky Dink podcast.
Appreciate it, Keith. Always a pleasure.
Glad to have you.
All right, man.
Thanks, Mark. Guess what? Goalie Nutrition is sponsoring Hard Knock Life, and you can go to goalie.com to buy apple cider vinegar gummies, their ashwagandha gummies, superfruit gummies, and super greens gummies. And you get 10% off plus free shipping if you use the code HARDKNOCK at goalie.com. This is honestly, I've been taking the goalie gummies now for a couple weeks, and I have to say, they're tasty and they're good for you. Have you guys been enjoying the goalie gummies?
I really like them. They're yummy, but it's a nice to add to my routine of already I normally take just straight vitamin C, so it's nice to have extra supplements.
For a long time, people have praised the benefits of apple cider vinegar. And, as someone who's had to drink straight apple cider vinegar sometimes when I'm not feeling well, or, I have some joint pain and your mom was like, drink some apple cider vinegar. It's not the most appetizing home remedy, let's just say.
Right. It tastes horrible.
So, the apple cider part is ooh, does it taste like apple cider? And it's no, it tastes like vinegar. But ACV is very good for you. And the fact that Goalie has been able to put the ACV into these tasty little gummies made with pectin and fruit peels, which make them vegan, which is cool. So if you're vegan, you can still rock these gummies, because everyone knows gummies are usually made out of gelatin and nasty shit. These are made out of complete non-GMO, gelatin-free, gluten-free, vegan ingredients, and you can get the benefits, all of the benefits of apple cider vinegar, taking these tasty, delicious, convenient gummies. So go to goalie.com and use the code HARDKNOCK, that's HARDNOC, just like the podcast you're listening to. Get 10% off your purchase of Goalie products and free shipping.
It's a much better delivery device for that apple cider vinegar.
Yeah.
These Goalie gummies are great. You get
I
it, and it's
agree
a
100.
delicious little candy. And I've been enjoying the Super Fruits one. I did feel kind of refreshed after taking a few of those.
Yeah, no, but I'm loving them so far, and they're definitely tasty. If you just want tasty gummies, at least just eat them for the yumminess.
Yeah. So go to goalie.com, use the code HARDKNOCK, HARDNOC, get 10% off your purchase and free shipping at goalie.com with the code HARDKNOCK. All right. What is nerd poppin', Brittany?
So I actually last night, if you saw my tweets, I watched the Frankenstein from 1931 for the first time ever.
Boris Karloff, Frankenstein? Where he throws the girl in the river and stuff.
Yeah. You could definitely tell it's Universal Studios if you're someone who's been to Universal Studios a lot.
Wait, spoiler alert, Frankenstein's monster throws a little girl in the river. After she gives him a flower or something.
I know, and I was like, oh. No, but it was really good. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot shorter than I thought. It was only like an hour and 10 minutes. I was expecting to be watching this movie for like 2 hours. And I was like, it's done already?
So what brought you into the Universal Monsters fold? What prompted revisiting a classic?
There's a lot of them I haven't seen that I should see the original films. Like I've talked about a few weeks ago, I'm really excited for the Werewolf by Night thing that Marvel's doing. So I was like, I should watch more.
Oh, right. Some of those, right. Get a feel for that. Yeah.
So yeah, I'll probably try to watch The Wolfman soon.
Were you a fan of Sherlock at all? The Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock?
I actually watched I want to say the first like 2 seasons.
Oh.
I think they did like 4 or 5.
Yeah,
right?
there was a few of them. I wasn't a huge fan of Sherlock. I was a very big fan of Elementary, which was the American version of the Sherlock Holmes story, starring Johnny Lee Miller and Lucy Liu. I bring it up only because 10 years ago, both Johnny Lee Miller, who played the American version of Sherlock Holmes, and Benedict Cumberbatch both played Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster on stage in London. And they would trade. Like one night it would be Benedict as the monster and Johnny Lee Miller as the doctor. And then the next night they would flip and Johnny Lee Miller would be the monster and Benedict Cumberbatch would be the doctor. And I just thought that was cool because they're both Sherlock Holmes and they were both Sherlock Holmes at the same time. And they were both Frankenstein at the same time. So I just thought
that's hilarious.
During the pandemic last year, I think it's the National Theatre of London, they actually streamed both versions on YouTube, but only for like a week because it was like the pandemic and like people here's a little taste. I wish I was able to like record it because I didn't get a chance to actually watch it. But I don't know, just you saying Frankenstein made me think of that because I've been in a Sherlock Holmes thing ever since I saw the Enola Holmes trailer. And then Henry Cavill, I think, is going to have a bigger role in Enola Holmes too. I just think it's so cool that like all these superheroes also play Sherlock Holmes because you have like Robert Downey Jr., Henry Cavill, Benedict Cumberbatch. Anyway, Dominic, what's nerd popping?
I don't really have one. I was trying to think of another part of Andor that I wanted to rave about, but I couldn't think of a specific part. Unless anyone wants to prompt one.
Stellan's outfit is amazing. We could talk about that. I love the jacket. I have a thing for really cool jackets and like film and TV or whatever. And the jacket I thought looks really cool. So I don't know.
No, yeah, you're right. I'll take that by proxy. It does look really cool. And the costuming is really on point among the other things. Anyway, go on, Keith. What's your yeah, awesome costumes in Andor.
Well, one thing we didn't get a chance to talk about last week, as I said, we always record Sundays and the show comes out on Monday, so we don't get the chance to talk about the shows that come out on Sunday nights or Monday nights. I was a huge fan of Quantum Leap back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And they've rebooted it. It's not even a reboot. That's a misnomer. It's a continuation of the original Quantum Leap story. It's just set 30 years later. And Scott Bakula, of course, played Sam Beckett, and he was lost in time. So this follows a new team that's trying to retrace the steps. And anyway, the big thing, to Dominic's point earlier about Asian American male romantic leads, is that the character who is the center of the show, who is essentially the Sam Beckett of this version, is played by the actor Raymond Lee. Dr. Ben Song is an Asian American man who is the one who's now leaping in the bodies of people in the past. And what's cool about that is that I don't know if you guys remember, there was a show on Netflix a couple years ago called Altered Carbon.
Oh, I never finished it, but yeah.
Yeah, remember that show? So it was it's based on these sci-fi novels, and the show was, or the story is that the character is a guy named Takashi Kovacs, who was an Asian American character, but he's in the body of like a white guy. But his mind, like, you know, his internal
Rick Flag
identity.
plays him, right?
Yeah, as an Asian American, and so but they cast Rick Flag, what's his name, Joel Kinnaman, to play him in the show. And I remember at the time saying like they should have cast an Asian American guy because the viewer should see the internal person, not who he sees in the mirror, right? But they cast the white guy because he looks white to the world, but he's actually Asian American on the inside. Anyway, so I remember the argument I made is like, well, if they did, it's like the Quantum Leap thing. They didn't recast Scott Bakula every episode when he was a different person. You know, he was always like you saw him because that's who the character, the audience should follow the character who's actually at the heart of the show. Anyway, all that said, 10 years later, someone must have heard me use that analogy because it was like, well, let's just do a Quantum Leap where the main guy's an Asian American guy. So anyway,
which is wild. Great. Have you watched these? Some episodes. I've not.
The first episode, which came out last week. There's going to be a new episode tonight. You know, I don't know how well the show's doing, and I know that there's some fans who are like disappointed because Scott Bakula said he's not involved, and you know, of course, Dean Stockwell died earlier this year, so there's no Al. But I think it's a great kind of like a continuation. The one thing I will say that's a little kind of like formulaic of like modern TV versus the, you know, shows of the late 80s is that what's cool about Quantum Leap is you could like dip in and out of any episode. It didn't follow like this long serialized story. And the new version, like they focus way more on like the team back home that's like tracking him down and working with Ziggy the computer and everything. And it's like a full team. It's not even like just Dean Stockwell, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of a serialized story that's, to me at this point, less interesting. Like I don't really care. I want to just follow Dr. Song around, you know, when he lands a new timeline or whatever.
Yeah.
Were you a fan of Quantum Leap at all?
No, I not really. So I don't have that much buy-in. But
were you like, did you miss out on it or you didn't like it?
I was mad towards it. It was sort of all right. I don't know. Maybe I was watching not that much TV during that particular time period where it came out or whatever. But of course, I saw the ad for this new Quantum Leap, and it's audacious and crazy now. It was like, wow. Because again, not to rehash the most rehashed thing, but it's crazy for an Asian American male lead seeing himself as the centered character in every story. I'm just going to break down to that moment when like he looks in the mirror and like he's the rock star. He's a white rock star of some period. He's like some Axl Rose type, character. I mean, that's really powerful for Asian American guys of a certain generation who looked at basically everyone who was a famous thing and not being able to put them in the template of being that person ever. Just look in the mirror and it's just wrong somehow. Anyway, so that was deep. It's so like, and again, because I don't have that much buy into Quantum Leap original, like it's so audacious and seems to be like a bit of a troll, but it could like, let's just not, oh, sorry, we realize we kind of, you know, gave you the short shrift all these years. We'll just do a series where we catch up and you can be every single character every single character in every time period, and we'll just take care of that, like, and you know, that'll, you know, repair the past. But that's not really what it is. But it's just
I mean, in a way it is. That's kind of what's powerful about it is that, you know, unlike you, I was a huge fan of the show, and I loved it. I mean, I cried in the finale when Sam never made it home, and spoiler alert. Yeah. And you know what's also cool about this new version is that even though I said I don't really care as much about the B story of the team kind of like tracking him, you know, because again, you think about like the man in the chair, right? Like there's always like the Team Arrow or Team Flash that's back on the computer is kind of like in your ear kind of thing. Like they have that here. But that team is very diverse, right? Like Ernie Hudson's like the leader of the team. There's like this cool diverse team back home, and then you have Ben Song like out in the field being the hero. And the other cool thing, the Dean Stockwell analog is actually his wife. So there's like this like, but he doesn't remember her because they have this whole like amnesia thing that's in this new version. So even if you weren't a fan of the original Quantum Leap, I don't think you have to like have a background degree in Quantum Leap to appreciate this. And I think just for like the socio-political reasons of like seeing Raymond Lee in the lead playing not just the hero but like a romantic lead and all that, I think it's worth watching. And I hope it does well, because I feel like here's a good example. Another show that was nerd popping a while back for me that also involves Asian Americans in time travel, Paper Girls.
Mhm.
canceled at Amazon. So like
What?
we
Yeah.
need to support these shows if we want to see more of them, you know.
Yeah.
I thought you were gonna say selfie.
I thought you were going to say
Well,
Into the
yeah.
Badlands. But anyway, there's a pattern here. They all don't last very long. There's
Yeah.
a pattern.
Right.
So yeah, so in a very basic way, yeah, you should watch Quantum Leap. We're excited by the concept.
Yeah, so check out Quantum Leap if you can. Anyway, Brittany Monet, how can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at Hi Brittany Monet, and I still haven't memorized the handle for the podcast now, but it's like at the Lit Crew, whatever. If you go to my Twitter, you'll see it in the bio.
Just search for Lituation Room.
Yeah, pretty much.
Dominic?
Oh, I'm Dominic Ma. On Twitter or Instagram, I'm Dom Ma, DOMMAH.
You can find me on Twitter at the Real Chow, the _real_ Chow, and on Instagram at Real Keith Chow. Follow the Nerds of Color at the Nerds of Color, and go to hardknockmedia.com to find this and all of the podcasts in the Hard Knock family. Please give a rating and a review if you do. Check out our videos at youtube.com/the Nerds of Color. You can actually see my interview with Mark Bernardin when you log on to there. Smash that subscribe button. Support us at patreon.com/the Nerds of Color. And until next time.
You know, you can be a little emo, or you can be just emo enough. But I think the thing you might want to do is be too emo.
Yeah.